Page 194 continued para. The various kinds of resources made over to the Donis included mines and deposits. These obviously were claimed by the king on account of his sovereign rights, but such rights could not be as effective under the royal agents as under the Donis, who would have the advantage of being on the spot. The transfer of hills, rivers, forests, etc. would have the effect of creating individual rights of the Donis in all the conceivable resources of the soil. Commercial crops were taxed in the Chandela dominions, and irrigation facilities may have brought taxes in the Paramara kingdom, where the grant of ponds, wells, and lakes, Vapi, Kupa, Taraga, along with the village points to this possibility. Irrigation cess was as old as the days of Kautilya, but now it seems to have been transferred to the Donis. The gift of hills, salt, and iron may have been inserted in several charters as a matter of form, for these surely did not exist in every donated village or piece of land. But where the gift land contained these appendages, the Donis' rights may have been effective. This would imply that those who quarried stone out of the hill or dug earth for building from the common land had to pay something. What else could be the reason for explicitly mentioning the alienation of these assets in favor of the grantees? Para. No ruler had set up any inspectorate to see that the Donis did not exceed the economic rights and privileges conceded to them, with the result that peasants were completely thrown at the mercy of the Donis, secular or religious. Perhaps they fared worse under secular grantees who had to meet certain obligations out of the villages granted to them. But in every case the peasant was not so much of a free, sturdy peasant proprietor as a semi-serf ministering to the needs of the grantees. Para. As shown earlier, the detailed enumeration of the resources of a donated village implies not merely the right to enjoy income from them, but also the right to own them. It has been argued that the Kalachuri grants transferred to the Donis, footnote 89, footnote Chotopri. It has been argued that the Kalachuri grants transferred to the Donis, 89, not the rights of ownership but only the royal prerogative of demanding land revenue and other dues in kind and cash, page 195. This may be true of those giants which only mention the name of the village and its revenues, but not of those which catalogue its resources with meticulous care. A shorter list of village resources is generally furnished by the Paramara grants, 90, which mention the pasture ground and the grassy land beyond it, and by the Chalukya land grants, which mention only the rows of tree, 91. The Chehmana grants provide the shortest list, for they merely name the village to be granted, 92. Hence, in Rajasthan, Malwa and Gujarat, the grantees were not given complete rights in the ground. But this cannot be said in general of the grants made by the Garhwalas and particularly the Chandelas. Para. It has been further held that the transfer of the village resources did not affect the rights of the village folk, who continued to use the water reservoirs, tanks, common pasture, etc. in common. 93. But once these rights were made over to the beneficiaries, it is difficult to see how long they would respect the customary rights of the village folk. As pointed out earlier, the constant presence of the Donis in the village would certainly lend to undermine the common rights of the villagers than would the occasional visit of the royal agents. Para. Sub-infeudation in its broad general sense of beneficiaries themselves making land grants not only continued but also increased during this period, 94. It has been shown elsewhere how members of the ruling clan, vassals and officials made grants out of their own assignments to priests and temples, sometimes with and sometimes without the permission of the king. 96, 95, and here sometimes they prevailed upon their sovereign to endow the temples erected by them with villages. Occasionally they also used their power and prestige to persuade the local merchants to patronize the shrines set up by themselves. It is true that religious grants did not involve any economic obligations towards the donors, who certainly could claim the good wishes and moral support of the beneficiaries, but they did give rise to several grades of rights in the soil, the assignee owing it to the royal favor, the religious beneficiary owing it to the assignee's favor, and the peasant owing it to the favor of both. Even where such wide powers were not considered, page 196, as in the case of the Kalachuris, religious bodies, mathas, and groups of brahmanas owning as many as 23 villages could not manage them without employing intermediaries who had to be paid by means of land grants or grants of revenues. Para. This brings us to the question of service grants, the paying of the even minor services by grants of land. The practice was as old as Kautilya's Arthashastra, which provides for the granting of land to various village functionaries in new settlements. Widely prevalent in feudal Europe, the practice seems to have been also current in certain parts of northern India. Thus, in Orissa under the Gangas, coppersmiths, braziers, and betel sellers were attached to the temple as a part of the grant, and at least some of them were assigned plots of land for their maintenance. 96. Although no epigraphic instances are found in Bengal, Bihar, UP, and central India, the practice seems to have been well established in the hill state of Chamba, where an 11th century grant shows that various plots of land previously granted to the cook, the local elders, Goshtika, the watchmen, Ashtapraharikas, and some minor officials, apparently for their services, were made over to the temple. 97. A certain portion of this land was expressly earmarked for the service of the watchmen, Ashtapraharikas, in the temple. 98. Such plots were stipendiary tenements given to temple servants. If this practice was followed in paying temple services, there could hardly be another practice followed in the payment of minor services rendered to the king and smaller rankilas, that is, feudal lords. Para. Some examples of the prevalence of this practice are found in Rajasthan. The earliest evidence comes from a land grant of 813 made to two temples in Udaipur, 99. It speaks of some fields granted by Vaidya Giyaka, Giyaka, of a Kayastha family, whose members seem to have served a Guhilot chief as scribes and physicians. 100. In consideration of which probably they had received some land. The practice also obtained under the Chaymanas of Nadol, as can be inferred from an inscription of 1141 Footnote 101. According to the 16 Brahmanas, 2 from each of the 8 wards into which the town of Dhalepa was divided were held responsible for the maintenance of security in the town, 102. If they did not help in tracing out thieves and yet asked for means of subsistence, they were to be punished, 103. Apparently, the Brahmanas were maintained by means of land grants for which they had to render secular services. Page 197, para. Some indication of service grants is also given by a Chaulukya inscription from Gujarat. A subordinate functionary, probably a Baniya under Bhima Deva II, constructed an irrigation well and a watering trough attached to it, and for their upkeep he granted certain plots of land to a man of the Pragvata clan, Pragvata, probably a merchant, 104. It is fair to assume that other similar grants may have been made in Gujarat. We have no idea of the extent of sub-infeudation caused by such service grants, but wherever they prevailed, they must have depressed the position of the peasants. Para. A few epigraphic records of the earlier period mention the transfer of peasants and artisans along with the donated piece of land or village. But by the beginning of the 11th century, when the Agni Purana 105 was finally compiled, it seems to have been a well-established practice. For this Purana recommends that villages with agricultural peasants, Ketaka, should be transferred to the Brahmanas, 106. It also advises that temples and mathas should be provided with lands and slaves, 107, and given facilities for dance and music, which would imply the gift of dancers and musicians. More references of the type occur in the records of this period. Thus, the land grants of Assam transfer houses 108, which certainly imply the transfer of peasants attached to the plots of land. A typical illustration is a mid-11th century grant from the Sylhet district, according to which the god Shiva received from King Govinda Keshavadeva 375 halas of land with 296 houses scattered in different villages, 109. The householders so transferred included not only peasants but also cowherds and craftsmen. The god was also endowed with many attendants such as bell metal workers, washermen, boatmen and shopkeepers who inhabited the soil made over to him, 110, para. Epigraphic records from Bengal do not refer to the transfer of peasants to the Donis down to the end of the 12th century. But later the practice spread to this part of the country as well. The Sena grants mention the names of peasants cultivating the plots granted for religious purpose. The copper plates from the Tipera district of about 1234 mention the gift of 12 houses in a village granted to 20 Brahmanas. Page 198, footnote 111. The term Griha-Ti used in this connection has been interpreted variously, 112. In our opinion, its Ti stands for Tila, still used in Bengal and Bihar for natural or artificial elevations made of earth. In Bangladesh, where the grant was made, the cultivating caste of Kaivartas and others still live in houses built on raised platforms with the object of checking the entry of water. The transfer of 12 houses therefore suggests that making over of peasants or agricultural laborers along with the ground on which they worked. Several examples are found in the earlier period in Orissa where for about 100 years from the middle of the 9th century weavers, brewers, cowherds and other villages covered by the term Prakriti were made over to the Donis, 113. In our period, the practice seems to have been widespread in the Chandela dominions in Bundelkhand. Here, peasants, artisans and traders were specifically transferred to the Donis along with the village 114. The custom also prevailed on a considerable scale in the Chehmana dominions, though in a slightly different form. According to the charter of Prince Sahanapala Deva of Nadol in 1135, Sohiya, Sohiya, and Asara, living in the village Nandana, were transferred to the god Tripurusa Deva along with their sons, grandsons, etc. in perpetuity 115. To the same god were surrendered by King Alhana Deva in 1148 two other peasants of the same village, Uma Ponanal, Uma, Pona, Pona, Nala, NL, and Mahashashiha, 116. It is not clear whether in the two cases the village in question was also granted to the god. But the persons who were allotted to the god were certainly peasants, Kutumbikas, 117. And the object for which they were transferred could have been no other than the cultivation of land belonging to the god. They have been therefore compared to Russian serfs, 118. A Chaulukya grant of 1207 informs us that the Meher king Jagamalla, a feudatory of the Chaulukyas, donated two lingas established by him in the large town of Talaja, 2 pieces of land in the neighboring 2 villages, and for their cultivation he named 3 peasants in the grant 119. The other area where this type of serfdom is attested was Chamba, where cultivators given away along with plots of land are named in a grant 120.